Hello beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Brina, and welcome to a brand new episode of Serial Saturday, where I do my makeup and we talk about serial killers. Last time we talked about Robert Pickton, and if you missed that story, it is so wild I had to make it into two parts. But this week we're going to be talking about Gerald and Charlene Gallego, or the sex slave murders that took place during 1978 to 1980. Also, I'm thinking about growing out my bangs. What do we think? I can't decide. I can never decide this. That's why I've gone from bangs to no bangs to no bangs to bangs, back again. I just can't make up my mind. I don't know what I want. Alright, we're gonna get into this video now. Charlene Williams was born October 10th, 1965 in Stockton, California. Being an only child, she was adored by her parents. She was smart and shy, played the violin, participated in after-school activities, and excelled in school. That is, until the age of 7, when her mother was in an accident that left her disabled. By the time she hit her teen years, she was tired of being a goody-goody, and she started rebelling by partying. She was also really big into gambling. By September 10th, 1977, exactly 1 month before her 21st birthday, Charlene meets a man named Gerald Gallego at a poker club in Sacramento. She immediately finds him charming and gentlemanly. She says he didn't even try to kiss her after their first date. And the very next morning, he sends her flowers. I mean, immediately sweeping her off her feet. Plus, Charlene, by this point, has been married not once, but twice. One of her marriages ended in an annulment, while the other in divorce. She also just really felt like she had no direction in her life. She had worked as a journeyman meat wrapper, as well as operating her own flower and glassware boutique, which she claims was a graduation present from her parents. So less than a week after meeting, the couple move in together. Yes, 1 whole week, they're already living together. Gerald was nearly a decade older than Charlene, and he came from a rough upbringing, being the product of a long line of career criminals stemming from both sides of the family. Gerald was born July 17th, 1946 in Sacramento to a mother who worked in the sex industry and had a long line of abusive ex-boyfriends. His estranged father was in prison for shooting a police officer when he decided to try to escape, at which point he killed a prison guard, and he became the first person in Mississippi to be executed by the gas chamber in 1955. By the time Gerald and Charlene met, he was a convicted armed robber with an outstanding rap sheet. He began his criminal career at the age of 6 with charges that included burglary as well as sex offenses. He was placed on juvenile probation. Then in 1959, following his charges for committing lewd and lascivious acts with a 6-year-old girl when he was 13, he was placed in a boys' school. In December 1963, Gerald meets his first wife. She's 21 and he's 16. In April of the following year, they welcome a child. That marriage was short-lived though, and somehow Gerald managed to gain custody of their daughter, who he sent off to live with his mother. On July 12th, at the age of 18, he marries a 24-year-old waitress. Though just 26 days after marriage number 2 starts, it also falls apart because it turns out Gerald not only likes to beat the shit out of his new bride, he also enjoys chasing her around with knives. So she got the hell out of Dodge and really just dodged a bullet there. Quite literally, if we're being honest. Following marriage number 2, Gerald does some more prison time, then marries lucky number 3 on October 14th, 1967. Once again, the marriage only lasts a month because Gerald also likes beating her. In March 1969, he marries yet again. I know, like, why did women keep flocking towards this guy? He has gotta be a serious case of Jekyll and Hyde, because why would women want to marry him? You know, if he was clearly as bad as he is, I don't think all these women would be lining up to marry him. And honestly, that is something that Charlene says about him, is that he really was a Jekyll and Hyde. Like I said, he was able to woo her, although I think in the case with Charlene, we kind of see exactly what he does. In my opinion, he finds women who are vulnerable and he just kind of saves them. Very quickly, he moves in, does the right things within the first week or so, bam, they're married, and then he shows his true colors. I feel like that's usually the case with abusers, you know? Gerald's 19-year-old bride finds herself pregnant and signing divorce papers just 1 month later. On October 5th, 1974, Gerald gets married for a 5th time This marriage is not quite as short-lived. They didn't actually separate until August of 1977. I'm just gonna assume that they were probably separated for the majority of that marriage, and it just wasn't legal until then, you know? By this point, he's had 23 arrests, and the only real work he can find is odd jobs as a bartender or a truck driver. So things aren't really going too hot for Gerald. And unbeknownst to Charlene, when her and Gerald began their relationship, he was technically still married to his 5th wife. She also didn't know that he had done 3.5 years for robbery, that he'd been charged with rape, incest, auto theft, and assault with a deadly weapon. And to top things off, she had no idea about his father's notorious status as the first person to be executed in the state of Mississippi in the gas chamber. So she bagged a real winner, and she has no idea. Ladies, let this be a lesson. Do not move in with any man that you just met in the last week, especially if you know nothing about him. Don't do it, okay? Giant red flags everywhere. To be quite honest, Gerald and Charlene's relationship got off okay, but it really wasn't long before Gerald's true colors started showing. But I would say the biggest problem in their relationship was, as it turns out, Gerald has problems achieving and maintaining an erection through just, regular intercourse with his woman, and he blames it on Charlene. So she decides she's going to try anything to satisfy her man. And that includes having a threesome with a runaway teenager that Gerald picked up. But he goes ballistic when he walks in to find the 2 women in bed without him. He goes into a rage, shouting at both women. Luckily for the runaway that they picked up, I don't know what happened to her. She apparently got away, lived, whatever, as far as I know. But that is when Gerald demands he needs involuntary participants. He can't get off with women who are submissive and willing to have sex with him. He's like, you know what I need? We need to kidnap a girl. So on July 17th, 1978, to celebrate his 32nd birthday, he sodomized his daughter, who he'd been molesting since the age of 6. But apparently molesting his poor innocent daughter is not enough for Gerald. So on September 11th, 1978, Charlene goes to a Sacramento mall where she lures 17-year-old Rhonda Scheffler and 16-year-old Kippy Vaught to her van on the pretense of they're gonna get high together. Unfortunately for the girls, once they enter the van, they're greeted by Gerald, who is pointing a gun at them. He then proceeds to tie them up and tells Charlene to drive to a secluded area. Once there, Gerald rapes and murders the girls with a single shot to the back of their heads. Their bodies were found 2 days later in a field. Right around the time of these first murders, Gerald's daughter had filed charges against him for the molestation and all of that. So on September 30th, 1978, Gerald and Charlene were officially married, but they quickly fled California for Houston so Gerald could try to avoid facing the charges. It was at this point that he took the alias Stephen Feel. They made their way to Reno, Nevada, where they abducted 14-year-old Brenda Judd and 13-year-old Sandra Cawley on June 24th, 1979, from the Wasco County Fair. This time, Gerald began raping the girls before they even made it to the desert. He then took them one at a time from the van off into the distance, only to return holding a shovel and a hammer. Charlene would later testify that he beat them to death with either the shovel or the hammer. And sadly, their remains weren't found and identified for 20 years. Then on April 24th, 1980, Stacy Ann Redican and Karen Chipman, both 17 at the time, disappeared from a Sacramento mall. Sound familiar? Their sexually abused and bludgeoned bodies were found on July 27th near Lovelock, Nevada. On June 1st of 1980, Gerald and Charlene marry again. This time, though, as Mr. and Mrs. Stephen Feel. 6 days later, the honeymooners pick up a hitchhiker on the Oregon highways. The hitchhiker turns out to be 21-year-old Linda Teresa Aguilar, who is noticeably 4 months pregnant. Linda gladly accepted the ride, but soon found herself fighting for her life when Gerald began raping and strangling her before eventually beating her over the head with a rock. Thinking she was dead, he buried her in a shallow grave outside of Golden Beach, Oregon. On June 22nd, 1980, German tourists discovered Linda's badly decomposed body. Sand found in her lungs would later reveal to authorities that she had in fact been buried alive and suffocated in the sand. Then on July 17th, Gerald decided it was time to find another victim. But this time, they didn't pick some random person. 34-year-old Virginia Mockle was lured into their van and abducted from the parking lot of a West Sacramento bar where she worked as a bartender. a bar that Gerald and Charlene frequented quite often and had been served on numerous occasions by Virginia. So my guess is Gerald's had his sights set on Virginia for a really long time, and he's just now finally deciding it's worth taking the risk abducting somebody they know. Following his usual MO, Gerald rapes Virginia, and following the rape, she actually begged him to take her life. If that tells you anything about how bad this raping was. I mean, I don't even want to know like the details of exactly what he did to these women, because I'm sure it was just completely horrific, every woman's worst nightmare. Gerald gladly obliged to Virginia's last wish. He strangled her, then dumped her body by a pond nearby. On October 3rd, Virginia's skeletal remains were found still bound with nylon fishing line outside of Clarksburg. In the early morning hours of November 2nd, 1980, the couple was hunting for yet another victim, or victims, when they saw a young couple leaving a frat party. Gerald got out of the car and walked up to 22-year-old Craig Miller and his fiancée, 21-year-old Mary Beth Sowers. He pulled a gun, pointed it in their faces, and ordered them into his car. Unfortunately for Gerald, one of Craig's frat brothers saw this whole exchange. He approached the car, asked Gerald, "What the fuck are you doing taking my friends? Like, what's going on here, you guys?" At which point Gerald speeds away, but not before the friend is able to write down the license plate number. After getting the couple in the car, Gerald and Charlene drive them to a secluded place where Gerald orders Craig out of the vehicle. He tells him to walk to the front of the car, and Mary Beth looks on in horror as Gerald puts a bullet in the back of her fiance's head. He then proceeds to fire 2 more shots into the back of Craig's head as he lies lifeless on the ground. He gets back in the car and orders Charlene to drive to their apartment, where he rapes Mary Beth for hours on end. When he was finally sexually satisfied, he ordered Charlene to drive them to another rural area. He orders Mary Beth out of the car and shoots her 3 times at point blank range. While all this is happening, Craig and Mary's friends are getting really concerned because they were kind of expecting them to come back to the party, but they never did. Plus, that whole exchange with them getting in the car with people they didn't know, they got worried, so they went to the police. They used that information to track down the registered owner of the car, which actually happens to be Charlene's parents. Her parents tell police, "Look, we didn't have the car, our daughter and her husband did. So go question them." Police question Charlene and Gerald, and at this point they still didn't have a positive ID on the suspect they were looking for. They were pulling mugshots of Gerald for the frat brother to look at, but eventually he did positively ID Gerald through a mugshot. So at that point, police were like, all right, this is them, we need to get them. But unfortunately, Gerald and Charlene have fled the state. They made it to Nevada, at which point Charlene calls her parents to ask them to wire her some money, and they're like, no, you guys are in a lot of trouble. You need to get back here and straighten this whole thing out. They move on to Nebraska, at which point Charlene calls her parents again.
Please send us money.
And her parents say, all right, we'll send you money. But they tell the FBI,
hey, they're in Omaha, Nebraska. They want us to wire them some money. We're gonna do it, but this is where they're going to be, and this is what time they'll be there.
So on November 17th, 1980, Gerald and Charlene are arrested at a Western Union in Omaha, Nebraska, where pregnant Charlene is trying to collect the money. Yes, at this point, Charlene is pregnant. So now she's getting arrested. That is unfortunate for her. Honestly, I'm really shocked that it took her this long to get pregnant, because he had 2 other wives that he got knocked up within a month. So hats off to her. Although I kind of get the feeling that maybe they just weren't really having sex because he was getting his needs met elsewhere. So maybe that's why she wasn't pregnant. Charlene and Gerald both pled not guilty to kidnapping and murder, and on January 17th, 1981, Charlene gave birth to a son behind bars. Then finally, in July of 1982, Charlene confesses to everything, telling police, look, this is what happened. I was not a willing participant, and it was all Gerald. Her attorneys were able to convince prosecutors in Nevada and California to allow her to testify against Gerald for a plea deal that reduced her prison sentence to just 16 years and 8 months. In June of 1983, with the help of Charlene's testimony, Gerald was convicted for the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Beth Sowers in California. In June of the following year, he was convicted for the murders of Karen and Stacy in Nevada. In both cases, he was sentenced to death. In July of 1997, Charlene completed her sentence and was released after 17 years behind bars. She reclaimed her maiden name and vowed that she had been brainwashed by her husband. While in prison, she studied psychology, business, and Icelandic literature. In 2002, a 56-year-old Gerald Gallego died from cancer in a Nevada prison medical center awaiting his execution. In the years since his sentencing, Gerald had proclaimed his innocence and attempted numerous appeals, all of which were denied because he did it. Clearly, that's the case of Gerald and Charlene Gallego. Let me know what you guys think about this one in the comments. I'm super curious to know if you think Charlene should have gotten more time, or if you also think she was a victim of Gerald's in this situation as well. I kind of think she was a victim because when you're young and in love, or you think you're in love, it is very easy to be manipulated. And then I also really think Gerald was kind of a master manipulator. So I just kind of think he got his clutches in on her. And if it wasn't for Gerald, I really don't think Charlene would have ever done anything like this on her own. So while she was a victim, I also think at some point she could have tipped somebody off. I understand why she didn't try to get away, because when you are in an abusive situation like that, it is very dangerous to try to get away from your abuser. So I think the reason she's still alive is because she didn't try to get away, because if she would have, he would have tried to kill her because she knew too much. But also, I think she would have been able to tip police off without Gerald knowing, you know? But I don't know. Let me know in the comments. Do you think she should have gotten more time? Do you think she should have gotten less time? I'm super curious to know what you guys think about this. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!